Welcome to Faith and Freedom. For the next few minutes, we hope to inform, inspire, and encourage you as we discuss legal victories and challenges to your fundamental freedom and religious liberties. Faith and Freedom comes to you from Liberty Counsel, a civil liberties education and legal defense organization. Join us now as Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel, explains the latest legal issues all across this country. In the courtrooms of America, Liberty Counsel is winning the battle for your constitutional freedom.
If it weren't for the Great Awakening, there would not have been an American Revolution, and pastors were a key to preaching truth from the pulpits. We need to return to that kind of biblical truth and boldness in the pulpits, and the church needs to wake up. I am Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Joining me is Matt Barber, vice president of Liberty Counsel Action. Matt, when you go back to the founding of America, the American Revolution didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a environment, and that environment was the Great Awakening here in America. This Great Awakening came from Europe to the United States, or to what is now the United States, and it was the pastors and the fuel of their sermons that actually spurred the fires of the American Revolution.
That's right. That was before groups like the ACLU and the Johnson Amendment sought to restrict pastors and put them over in a corner and say, you can't have anything to do with politics. Well, guess what? We're talking about issues of morality, moral issues, transcendent issues of life, liberty, family, freedom, things that are within the purview of the church that the left has taken and politicized. They made these issues political. We didn't. And in the spirit of people like Peter Muhlenberg, a pastor who stood at his pulpit during the Revolutionary War times, preached a sermon on Ecclesiastes 3, said, for everything there is a time, tore open his robe to reveal underneath a uniform of a colonial army officer, and in that day 300 pastors joined him. It's time for pastors across America. You know, we've called the IRS's bluff. They've thrown up their arms and essentially said, we're no longer going to enforce and to try to bully pastors into silence. How many churches, Matt, have lost their tax-exempt status for preaching about moral issues that have been politicized from the pulpit?
Zero. Not a single one.
Even for endorsing candidates.
Yeah, and that Johnson Amendment came in 1954
right.
That says that nonprofits can endorse or oppose candidates for office. Not one church has ever lost its tax-exempt status for endorsing or opposing a candidate. Not one church has ever lost its tax-exempt status since 1934, when the restriction came into the IRS code that you can't devote more than a substantial part of your activity to lobbying for or against legislation. So churches have a lot of freedom that they often don't utilize. And, you know, when you go back, David Barton does a very good job of this with Wall Builders, where he actually shows the sermons, their annual election sermons and other sermons that pastors would preach. Pastors were called in to address the legislators as they began the legislative session and give a sermon, not just a little opening prayer, but a sermon that really set the tone for their job and their obligation and their duty as magistrates from a biblical perspective. Pastors were very involved. There wasn't the TV and there wasn't the internet, so where did the news come from? The news and the discussion of the days, you know, the current political pundits, they weren't on TV. They were pastors who were in the pulpit speaking about biblical truth and applying it to the realities of their community.
Yeah. I like to say it's time to reunite church and state. And, of course, that makes the left go nuts because of this language of separation of church and state, nowhere to be found in the United States Constitution. Now, am I calling for a theocracy? Of course not. That's what we're accused of on a daily basis. But this idea, Matt, that somehow religious and moral issues and political issues are mutually exclusive and they're in two different zones, two different worlds. No, they're intermeshed. I believe, and I would ask pastors to prayerfully consider, those of you who've been kind of sitting on the sidelines and saying, well, I don't want to get involved in these political things. They're not political. They're biblical. And I believe it's your duty as a pastor from the pulpit to inform your flock, to engage your flock, to encourage your flock, to get involved in the public policy process, engage their culture, and to help further biblical principles within public policy. It's the duty, I think, of pastors to do that. I think it's their calling.
I think it is their calling. And before I went to law school, I was a pastor, and I still have a pastoral role. and certainly understand the role and the calling of pastors. And a pastor is to preach the Word of God, to be instant in season and out of season, and to rightly divide the word of truth. That's a calling of a pastor, to be the shepherd to the sheep, to be that clarion voice of truth, to be the prophet to their community, like the prophets of old, to speak the truth, whether people want to hear it or whether they don't want to hear it, to be able to minister in that way. And, the problem that oftentimes we see is that churches, some of them, are not connecting with reality in everyday life, so it's not relevant to people. Pastors, I encourage you to be able to speak. We have a DVD that we will make available to pastors, and it's on pastors, churches, and political activities, discussing what kinds of issues you can teach and speak about and how you can do it. Again, as we said earlier, not one church has ever lost its tax-exempt status for engaging in either lobbying on legislation or endorsing or opposing candidates.
There's one church that lost its letter of tax exemption. Explain that.
Yeah, there's only one church that ever. Churches, unlike nonprofit organizations, don't need a letter from the IRS. From the moment of their creation, they are tax exempt. Unlike nonprofit organizations, which have to then file for exemption and they get a letter, their exemption is equivalent to the letter. Churches don't need that, however. This particular church in New York obtained a letter, and it was tax exempt, but it didn't need the letter, it just had it. And it opposed then Governor Bill Clinton for president in 1992 because of his position on abortion. Took out full-page ads in the USA Today and Washington Times newspaper, tens of thousands of dollars expense. And then the IRS came after them afterward and said, oh, you had crossed the line. You actually publicly endorsed a candidate. In this particular case, you opposed a candidate for office. And instead of saying, I'm sorry, we'll move on, and they didn't need to fight this because there was no more election. They ended up wanting to fight. IRS took the letter. They filed suit. The Court of Appeals said, well, IRS can take the letter, but it's really irrelevant because it means nothing. It's
so again,
symbolic.
They never, for an instant, lost their tax-exempt status.
Right, because the church didn't need the
and
letter
they didn't
in
need
the first
the letter.
place.
The letter wasn't worth it.
And the IRS
cost of the
admitted that
ink.
not one contribution had been taxed or taxable. They never lost their tax-exempt status, and they're tax-exempt to this day.
I hope pastors will listen to this and consider this when you're intimidated into silence from the pulpit. Understand, you have every right. It is your constitutional right as an individual citizen to speak truth from the pulpit, even if it touches and concerns issues that are considered of a political nature, even if it touches and concerns candidates. And we've seen thousands of candidates pastors across the country who have defied the Johnson Amendment, stood from the pulpit, endorsed candidates, and this has prompted the IRS to essentially say, okay, we cried wolf, you called our bluff, we're no longer going to even try to prosecute.
So, with regards to legislation that takes place in your state, pro-life legislation, other pro-family legislation, other issues of biblical values, you can speak out on that. You can encourage people to get involved and support or oppose that particular legislation. You can certainly do that on a national level as well. People that are nominated for office, like Thomas Perez, nominated for the Labor Department, in charge with enforcing the laws on non-discrimination. When he doesn't enforce them as a person who was with the Department of Justice, he's completely the wrong person for that. You can speak out on that. You can encourage people. You can give information to them. Contact Liberty Counsel for more information because we are developing a pastors network. We have over 600 now as part of our Florida Faith and Works that's now merged with Liberty Counsel in Florida. We're also developing an outreach to pastors in the states around the country. If you want to be a part of that, if you want to have a part where either you are a pastor and want to take a leadership role to help work with other pastors, call us. Or if you're a member of a church, what we also want are people who are members of churches who will be the conduit to bring information to those churches and to the pastors to keep that information fresh and relevant to the pastors. Yeah. You can contact us at 800-671-1776.
It's time. Pastors are called for a time such as this to lead their flock, to be salt and light in a culture that desperately needs salt and light.
Well, go to Liberty Counsel's website. I know there's a lot of things to get discouraged about that's taking place in the country, but instead of getting discouraged, God's called us to be encouraged. God's called us to work today and leave the results to Him. Go to Liberty Counsel's website to learn more about how you can be involved and how you can support this ministry through financial support of this ministry. You can extend your reach to all these different issues around the country. You can go to Liberty Counsel's website and make an online credit card contribution right there. You can also get the address and mail in a contribution to Liberty Counsel in a lot of different ways. If you have questions, call us at 1-800-671-1776. Also, we have the DVD for pastors, churches, and political activity, and we also have the Patriots Handbook series regarding what pastors and churches can do. I ask that you order that and continue to pray for Liberty Counsel. Go to Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org. That's lc.org.
You have been listening to Faith and Freedom with Liberty Counsel. We hope that we have motivated you to stand up for your faith, family, and freedom. We can accomplish a lot when we work together. Get informed and get involved today. Sign up for our free monthly newsletter, The Liberator. We will send it out to you free of charge. Stay informed with our Liberty Alert email updates. Just click on the website at www.lc.org or call us at 1-800-671-1776. Tune in next time to learn more about your rights right here on Faith and Freedom.